When it comes to budget decks in Flesh and Blood, I don't think there's a hero more suited to it than Cindra CC of Retribution. After seeing the recent success of the fully tuned Redline Cindra decks, I really wanted to give this hero a go, but I had a problem. I don't have any of her new Majestics, I didn't get the new chess piece, and worst of all, I sold my Flick Knives last year when they were like 25 bucks. Rip bozo. But I decided to push forward anyways, building the best Cindra deck I could with what I already owned, which included a Mask of Momentum and Fandel Spring Tunic. And I was genuinely really impressed with how good the deck was. So impressed, in fact, that I decided to challenge myself to make the strongest build I could for the cheapest price. So I got to work removing all but 4 Majestics in total and tuning the deck to work as smoothly as possible. The result was this deck, which has actually been winning me games, and I even took down my Armory last night with it. So while a fully tuned Cindra list will run you about $1,100, I would like to present to you my budget alternative at just about $80. Not only does this deck function surprisingly well as is, it also provides a great shell for you to upgrade towards a fully tuned list. So if you did manage to pull any of Cindra's new Majestics or the Legendary, you can add them to this deck no problem. So without further ado, let's get into it. Deck list down below. Just like the competitive Redline builds, this Cindra deck wants to be very aggressive, pressuring the opponent with the mixture of daggers and small attacks that culminate in large combat chains. However, unlike those tuned Redline builds, we're missing cards like Blood Spattered Vest, Art of the Dragon Blood, and Ignite. This means that our deck will have to lean on blues, and so the breakdown is 45 reds, 3 yellows, and 12 blues, giving us enough pitch to maintain our larger turns while not frequently clogging up our hands. The core strategy to this deck is quite simple. You want to start a Draconic Chain Link, usually with a dagger, and then follow it up with as many attacks as possible, finishing with a Chain Ender for plenty of damage. Draconic matters a lot, especially for some of those Chain Enders, and so learning how to use Fealty and the copies of Brand with Cinderclaw is key to piloting this deck successfully. Most of the skill curve with this Cindra deck is going to be figuring out how to sequence your attacks to make it as difficult as possible for your opponents to stop the flow of damage. But now that you have an idea of the basic strategy, let's hop into the deck itself, starting with Cindra, her kunai, and the main equipment loadout. Cindra's hero text reads, whenever you hit a marked hero, create a Frailty token. Once per turn instant, pay 3. Equip up to 2 Draconic Daggers from your graveyard. This costs 1 less to activate for each Draconic Chain Link you control. Her first ability has some use, as there are a few cards that can mark a hero in the deck, but it's her second ability that we really want to focus on. The ability to recur your Kunai of Retribution is a huge focus of the deck, and juggling 1 in the grave and 1 on board every turn is a common play pattern you'll want to employ. Many of the cards in this deck require a Draconic Chain Link to get go again, and so getting caught without any daggers at the start of your turn can quickly lose you the tempo of the game if you draw poorly. Because she cares about having a wide Draconic combat chain to make her ability free, Cindra wants to consistently flick her daggers to get them into the grave without closing the chain. However, since we don't have Flick Knives to do this every turn, we have to get a little creative. The deck runs a few ways to do it with attack actions, but one thing I found was that if you have another Draconic starter, you can sometimes attack with a dagger, close the chain, and then do your turn, recurring the dagger at the end of that chain, so you always have one for your following turn. Of course, a hero was only as good as their equipment, and thankfully, Cindra actually has some really solid options. Starting off with the one Majestic equipment piece, we've got the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, which only costs about $5. This card can block 2 in a pinch, but 99.69% of the time, you're going to be using it on a go wide turn to search for a Lava Burst so you can end your chain with a clean extra 5 damage. After that, we've got the Blossom of Spring, which gives you a free resource and can help you when you have an all red hand, or it can unlock the power turns this deck is able to accomplish with Spreading Flames. Danger Digits is a one-time Flick Knives. It can help you guarantee you have a dagger engraved for Cindra's ability. And finally, there's the Snapdragon Scalers, which can usually just help you if you draw a clunky hand with no natural go against starters. But you can also be cheeky like me and use the Snappies and the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx on a Lava Burst to go and search for another Lava Burst and play that after. It's great. If you have pulled or already own any legendaries that Cindra normally wants to use, or something like a Fandel Spring Tunic, then those are better options and you should absolutely be playing them. But the main loadout that we're working with here has proven to be surprisingly solid, and with a bit of careful playing, each piece can really help maximize your damage output. Of course, while a hero would be nothing without the equipment would be nothing without the deck, and so it's time to take a look at the breakdown of this aggressive budget Cindra deck. In order to go through this deck in the most understandable way, I'm going to break it down into 3 main sections: the Unconditional Go Again, Conditional Go Again, and Chain Enders. So starting with the Unconditional Go Again, let's talk about the main power card of the deck and the only other Majestic, Spreading Flames. This is a 1-cost attack that buffs your Draconic attacks as long as their base is less than the number of Draconic Chain Links. Because it's a Draconic card itself, Spreading Flames automatically gives the daggers a +1 boost, and if we send both of them, it will also start buffing any 3 power attacks added to the chain. You're going to want to try to set this card up for a big turn to maximize its potential, neutral, and you'll also want to pay attention to the cost of cards in your hand. If you have a blue and everything costs 0, then you can simply pitch that blue and send the Spreading Flames and the daggers. But if you have a 1 cost attack in hand, you'll likely want to use the Blossom of Spring to play the Spreading Flames, so you can use the blue for both the daggers and the other 1 cost attack. It's also important to note that if you attack with both daggers to get the full value from Spreading Flames ability, you'll also want to make sure you have a way to flick at least one of them off the chain so that you can recur at least that 1 dagger. If you can't, you might either have to send only 1 in that turn or just deal with not having any daggers for your next turn. If it's late enough in the game and you've applied enough pressure, you might be able to get away with wasting both the daggers for your turn if your opponent has to spend their whole hand blocking. Spreading Flames is by far the most expensive card in the deck, costing about 10 bucks a piece, but it really is necessary. Because we don't have the extra damage from things like Flick Knives and the other powerful Majestics, you need to be able to take the tempo from your opponent with a huge power turn, and Spreading Flames is the cleanest way to do that. Moving on to the other Unconditional Go Again cards, we have another key part of your damage output, which is making sure that your cards are all Draconic, and this is where we have 9 copies of Brandwith Cinderclaw. This card is pivotal for making your Chain Enders work, but the yellows and blues also serve as resources, which makes this card not only strong, but also incredibly flexible. Next up, we've got both the red Ronin Renegade and Rising Resentment. These are usually both just 0 for 3 Go Again Draconic cards, but Rising Resentment has the bonus of possibly letting you send a 1-cost Draconic for free if you manage to hit with it later on in the chain. And to finish off the Unconditional Go Again, we've got 2 copies of Fire Tenant First Strike. This card isn't a Draconic card by itself, but it does boost your next Draconic attack by +1, helping us push damage and get those on hits. And while not being a Draconic is a downside, between fealty tokens and the Brandwith Cinderclaws, it's pretty easy to turn this card into a Draconic attack for your chains. But that is it for the Unconditional Go Again attacks, and so now let's take a look at the longer list of Conditional Go Agains, starting with the best one, Blaze Headlong. This card is a 0 for 4 that gets Go Again if you've played another red card, and with 45 of them, that's quite easy to do. On top of that, this card actually pairs wonderfully with the Fire Tenant we were just talking about, as they become a 2-card 8 when paired together. But then we've got several cards that require a Draconic chain link, usually a dagger, to get their abilities. Starting with Lava Vein Loyalty, this card's only ability is to get Go Again if it's the 2nd or higher Draconic link. The reds are great chain extenders, whereas the blues are fantastic for having 3 block while also being playable in a pinch. Burning Blade Dance is like Lava Vein Loyalty, but better, since it has all the same conditions, but also has the on hit to flick your dagger. This is a great card to pump with either the Fire Tenant if you've made it Draconic, or to send on a Spreading Flames turn. Then we've got a pair of cards that can mark the opponent, those being the 0 and 1 cost, Hot on Their Heels, and Mark with Magma. Fealty tokens are crucial for using the deck's Chain Enders, so being able to mark the opponents and then hit them with small attacks is very strong. Even better than that is just straight up making the fealty tokens. Much like the mark cards, we've got both a 0 and 1 cost in Display Loyalty and Demonstrate Devotion. These both generate fealty on attack, not on hit, and so these are cards that you want to prioritize actually attacking with so that you can bank the fealty for when you need them. And finally, we have a card that technically has Unconditional Go Again, but is more or less required to send at the end of a chain anyways, Wrath of Retribution. If you manage to get 3 Draconic chain links, this card attacks for free, giving a +1 buff to your daggers and lets them swing for free. This card is a bit tricky to use, as you'll usually want to attack with your daggers after it, but using things like Danger Digits and Burning Blade Dance can help you get to that 3 Draconic chain links, flick your daggers, recur them, and then send them with that +1. If you can manage to pair Wrath of Retribution with the Spreading Flames, you just might be able to push enough damage to win the game right then and there. And if not, well, card blocks 3. But okay, so that was it for our Go Again, both Unconditional and Conditional. But in order to actually close out our games, we need a way to push a lot of damage, which is where the Chain Enders come in. Starting off with the one I mentioned while covering Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, we've got 2 copies of Lava Burst. This card is a 0 for 5 as long as it's Chain Link 4 or higher, which is very easy to do with this deck. You'll often be able to use it on a turn when you just draw it, but being able to search it out directly with the mask is what makes it so powerful. Following that up, we have another 0 cost Chain Ender in both the red and blue Silver Talons. This card requires you to turn it Draconic to get its full power, but if you do, it throws a dagger at the opponent on attack. While it doesn't have Go Again, being able to flick your dagger off the chain at the end allows you to recur that same dagger, giving you more flexibility with how aggressive you want to be on your turn. And even if it's not Draconic, being a 0 for 4 can be solid on its own, as it presents extra breakpoint damage on the chain. But our best Chain Ender is one that makes great use of the blues we run in the deck, and it's one we always want to make Draconic: Art of the Dragon Fire. This card is a 1 for 5, and if it's Draconic, it also throws 2 damage at the opponent. This makes the card a 1 for 7 if we banked a fealty or use a brand with Cinderclaw, and can be devastating to an opponent if we send it at the end of an already large chain. But the card can also just straight up win you the game if your opponent doesn't have a prevention effect, as you can simply pop a fealty, pitch 1 card, and then just send this and deal 2 damage before they get a chance to block. In fact, being a 1 for 7 is so good in this deck that we're actually running a 4th copy with 1 red Dragon Power. This card gives itself a +3 boost, which isn't as strong as just dealing 2 damage, but is still worth the include. What's more impressive about the Dragon Power though is the fact that it comes in rainbow, and so we're also running the blues, because a blue block 3 that can turn itself into a 1 for 5 at the end of a chain is crazy good in a deck like this. And that's actually going to be it for the 60 card deck list. Your main turns are going to be mostly pitching a blue or a yellow, sending a dagger, extending your chains with your go again cards, and then ending with a finisher when you have one. Spreading Flames is your power card, so you want to make sure you utilize it well. I would recommend trying your best to save some of your equipment like Blossom of Spring and Mask of the Pouncing Lynx for one of those power turns. However, there still is a little bit to go, because unlike the Armory decks, we actually have a sideboard to cover. I'd like to note though that this is more of a loose sideboard, and I highly encourage you to make whatever changes you'd like to fit your personal meta. Starting off with the equipment, we've got some Arcane Barrier. Tide Flippers is our strongest piece, and you'll want to use it against Runeblades, since Snapdragon Scalers is mostly just here to help fix those clunky hands. Into wizards like Kano and Verdance, you will likely also want to run the Arcane Lantern and No Rune Gloves, so you can get full value from your blue pitch cards. Or you can just, try and run them down if you want. It's your choice. The only other piece of equipment I chose to run was a tech piece in Blade Beckoner Gauntlets. The idea here is that it can help into Warrior by blocking 2, but it can also be useful into New. Because Guardwell only gets counters on how much it blocked, you can use it to block a breakpoint on something like a Leave No Witnesses, and then use it to block 1 later against a Beckoning Mistblade. Speaking of blocking, I also included playsets of Sink Below and Fate Foresee. With so many disruptive decks in the metagame, you are going to have matchups where you need to block. Personally, I had chosen to swap out the red Lava Vein Loyalties as well as the Wrath of Retribution and Fire Tenants when I wanted both Sink and Fate, but you might also be fine with just one or the other in your deck instead of both. Like I said, this is a more loose sideboard. But finishing it off, we got 2 copies each of the Art of the Dragon Scale and Breaking Point. Both of these are chain enders that swing for 5, with the scale targeting equipment if it's Draconic, and Breaking Point destroying the arsenal if it's played on Chainlink 4 or higher. You can also choose to run Art of the Dragon Claw in this slot over the Breaking Point if you'd like. For some reason, I didn't pull a single copy of that card, despite opening up 3 full boxes as well as another box worth of packs between my pre-releases. Either way, the idea here is the same. While Art of the Dragon Fire and Dragon Power are fantastic 1 for 7s, sometimes you want to be a bit more disruptive, and so removing the 1 Dragon Power and 1 of the Dragon Fires, you can slot in either Disruptive Chain Ender in order to put your opponent off balance. However, that will be all for this deck tech. Again, TCG Player has a deck for about 80 bucks or so, but honestly, there's a good chance you already have a bunch of the bulk for the deck. The true cost really comes from the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx and the Spreading Flames, with the rest of the deck being dirt cheap after that. The only other card that costs a bit of money is Sink Below at about $250 each. Also, if you're looking at the deck list on Fabrary, you'll notice that there are some cards in the maybe section at the bottom. These are just different cards that I was tinkering around with, and so if you want to alter the deck a little to make it more your own, these are some options for cards that could work well for you. But with all that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope this deck list does well for you. Playing the Cindra deck felt like playing a beefed up Armory deck, and I was super impressed with just how strong it actually was. Sure, if you're facing the best player at your locals who's on a top tier $1,000 plus deck, probably not going to win. But you will be able to have a good back and forth game. And into a lot of the more mid-tier heroes, you actually do have a decent shot. I was able to straight up body both a Bolton and Florian back to back in my Armory last night, which was pretty sick considering they were both tuned lists. Anyways, thanks for watching, and thank you to all the patrons. It's because of chads like you that I'm able to even keep up with this ever increasingly expensive game, and so I really do appreciate it. Thanks to the Giga Chads Geeks First, Elixir, Vinny, John, Ty, Chemical, Bryant, Dark Memoria, and Big Hungry. Then we've got the Alpha Chads Thomas, Zajima, and Aaron, and then there's the Super Chads Thal, Cece, Ben, Yogbadoodles21, Scott, Kevin, and Wolf Shadowmancer. Thanks again as always, and stay chadly, my friends.